All right, Kevin back with you for another episode of the $1 Million Relationships Podcast. And today I'm here with Bryan Post. Bryan, welcome. So awesome to have you on the show today.
Thank you, Kevin. Super excited to be here with you and your listeners, and looking forward to sharing the space together.
Same. And I want to start off by just giving a shout out to Tamara Thompson and her team. They are doing some amazing, you know what? She is such, her and both of them, her and her sister are both just real sweethearts and just doing an amazing work. And you and I got introduced through them. And what's beautiful about that is, I've known those two for a while. And anytime, I get connected with someone that comes via a introduction from somebody that we've already got trust with and just have a great relationship. Bryan, you and I already had a conversation prior to this, and it was like we've known each other for years because of our mutual friendship with Tamara and her team and stuff. And what a
Well, that's the
testament.
power. That's the power of the million-dollar relationships, right?
Amen. That's it right there. And so Tamara, shout out to you guys. And Bryan, what I would like to do is I just want to start off. I want to turn it over to you. And so we can set a little bit of context. I want you to be able to talk about what you do and who you serve and what inspires you most about the
Okay.
work you get to do. And of course, give us some of the backstory. And I know that's kind of broad, but it gives you some leeway to just kind of share from your heart and go where you're feeling led to go too and stuff.
Okay. Well, Bryan Post, I specialize in working with adopted and foster children, primarily those who have experienced a great deal of trauma, and that trauma surfaces through their severe behavior problems. So I've been doing that for the last 27 years. And I got into the field myself because I was adopted, spent a little time in foster care. I also had an adopted sister, and she and I both had quite a bit of behavior challenges as children. And our parents, though loving and consistent and predictable, they both were very old school in their parenting approach and did not realize that those traditional parenting practices, when used with children who are already stress sensitive, who already have histories of trauma, they actually just create more stress, which then exacerbates the problem even more. Now, I was able to navigate stress a little more effectively than my sister because I had a much better in utero experience. My sister had a much poorer in utero experience, so she was really emotionally stunted. So my parents really struggled with her immature behaviors. And it really led to World War III growing up. We spent a lot of time in conflict. There was a lot of yelling, a lot of hitting, a lot of whipping. And we just muddled through. And my sister eventually left home when she was 15, which was just the beginning of a kind of a long life of legal problems and challenges, jail and prison and drugs and things of that nature. And my parents never really were able to come to any deeper understanding of who she was and the challenges that she had. It did get a little bit older as she became an adult, but by and large, her childhood had pretty much imprinted her in a pretty painful and overwhelming way, and she just lived through that, and I experienced that growing up, and I feel like that was just a part of my purpose for the work I do in really helping parents understand themselves and their children better so that they can create a more peaceful, more harmonious, more love-filled relationship. A lot of times we don't realize just traditionally that most of our traditional parenting practices like timeout, spanking, consequences, grounding, shaming, all of those are rooted in stress and fear. And
Okay.
when you're working with a child who has definitely adopted and foster children, but when you're working with a child who has a trauma history, those practices just exacerbate the foundation of their trauma, and it doesn't allow them an opportunity to heal. So that's what my focus is. It's been that way for the last 27 years. I've written and co-written 18 books. I've traveled all around the world lecturing and working with families in their homes and produced hundreds of video programs, and that's what I do. That's my mission. That's what drives me.
Yeah. So what were the circumstances, Brian, that first got you in? I mean, I totally, your background is in perfect alignment with what you're doing now. What was the first circumstances that allowed you to first start doing this kind of work?
Well, I went to graduate school because I didn't know what else I was going to do. I went to undergraduate on a football scholarship, and a couple years after that, I got tired of feeling hurt all the time, and so I fell into a social work class, and I had a couple of great professors, and then I decided after my bachelor's degree to go ahead and get my master's degree, and so I found a program at the University of Texas at Arlington. So I went to school there. And I was going through the program, and as I was going through the program, I had a professor. His name was Larry Anderson. And one day he saw me walking across campus, and he said, "Hey, Bryan, where are you going to do your clinicals at?" And I said, well, I don't know." And he said, "Why don't you do them here?" And that was at the community clinic. And that was the first time I ever did any practicing role as a clinician. And really, that was a definitive moment for me. And that's what I decided I wanted to do from that point forward.
Yeah, yeah. And so 27 years of doing this. Now, I'll bet you have some stories, Brian.
I've got stories for days.
And what is an example? And I'm sure you can come up with tons of examples of this. So of course, you don't need to share names or anything, but what's an example of a result that you've helped to get for someone that you're just really incredibly proud of?
You know, I think results vary. The biggest result is I help children remain in their homes where they don't get sent to residential treatment and they don't have disrupted adoptive placements. When adoptive placements or foster placements get too stressful, parents can just relinquish the rights. And when
Okay.
they relinquish the rights, children go back into care, and then they live the rest of their lives bouncing around from home to home. So probably, my biggest successes are being able to go in and work with families and secure placements. I've worked with kids who have had 70 different placements before, and then coming
Wow.
into one of the homes that I train and support, making that their permanent lifelong home.
Wow.
And I've been doing this long enough, Kevin, that the families I first started working with who had small children, their children are now grown and having their own children. So, our biggest my biggest success is just being able to keep kids in their home with families who understand them differently, help them to grow up feeling loved and supported, and having good high self-esteem. And I recently had a lecture, and I had a mom show up at my lecture, and she said, "I came to hear you 20 years ago. And 20 years ago, my son and I, we were in a crisis. He'd been kicked out of a couple of different schools. I didn't really know where to turn, but I came to your presentation, and it completely changed the way I do things with my son. And now he's 32 years old, and he's the social media manager for the Golden State Warriors and
Wow.
Seth Curry." So,
Wow.
I have all kinds of stories like that.
Yeah.
Just it's a paradigm of parenting that is not common, and it's the love-based model of parenting. And when parents really understand it, they just see themselves differently, and they understand their children differently, and then everything changes.
Yeah. I can only imagine that child that had been in 70 homes.
Hmm.
And, I mean, I can imagine after 5 or 10 or maybe 15 or 20, they're probably like thinking, like, man, can
Yeah,
anybody even love me? Can any,
yeah,
and but
feel pretty unloved.
after 70, wow. And then to find a home that now there's a long-term
Well,
situation.
and let me tell you, to not only find that home, but to find a set of parents. And this was Harold and Edna Crawford. They were a set my very first trained therapeutic parents who were willing to go through the battle with this young lady and hang in there with her. She came to us when she was 18. She's now 30 years old, and she texts me probably at least once every couple of weeks, just checking in, wanting to know how I'm doing. And she calls me uncle now, and I call her niece. But they parented this child all the way through, and that's who she refers to as mom and dad.
Wow. That is so awesome. Wow, wow, wow. And like I said, you got so many stories like that. I know.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you other stories just on a not on smaller levels, but just as intense. I had a mom who reached out to me once, and she said, my daughter talks nonstop about nothing at all, incessant chatter." She said, "What do you do about that?" And the classical approach is to tell the child to stop talking, send the child to their room, give them a timeout, or take away their dessert. That's kind of the traditional approach is
Okay.
is you see the behavior, and you just try to suppress it. You try to change it. You try to make it go away. And so I asked the mom, just to give you kind of an indicator of my approach, I asked the mom, I said, "Well, do you ever listen to her?" And mom said, "No." I said, "Well, let's start there. Give her 20 minutes of quality, undivided time and attention. Just put the phone down, turn the TV off, and just listen to her." Because, see, a child who's incessantly chattering is a child who doesn't feel secure in her connection. So, as soon as mom
Oh,
realized that she just needed to listen to the child, all the chatter goes away.
yeah.
And so, mom did that. That fixed that problem. 2 weeks later, she emailed me and she said, "Okay, I got one for you. Every single night is a bath time battle. I go into her bedroom. As soon as I tell her it's time to take a bath, she starts flipping out on the ground, kicking and screaming. But instead of letting her throw a big old tantrum, I jump on top of her and I hold her down until she's calm. Once she's calm, we go in the bathroom. As soon as she sees the bathtub, she starts flipping out, kicking and screaming all over again. But this time, whether I've got all my clothes on or not, I'm putting her in that bathtub. So I put her in that bathtub, water splishing and splashing everywhere. It was so bad, and this had been going on. This had been going on for 5 years. It was
Wow.
so bad that mom wouldn't even try to wash the little girl's hair. She'd take her to the hairdresser to get her hair washed because she's like, "I was not going to deal with the hair washing." So she said the water splishing and splashing everywhere. We finally fall out of the tub exhausted, and then she won't go to sleep. She said, "What do I do about that?" And I said, "Here's what I want you to do. The next time it's bath time, I want you to go in there. And when you say it's time for a bath and she starts flipping out, kicking and screaming on the ground, instead of jumping on top of her, I want you to sit on the bed." And I teach a parenting technique called the three-phase intervention, the 3 R's: reflect, relate, and regulate. As long as the child's not at risk of harming themselves or someone else, the first thing the parent has to do is stop and reflect. Take 3 to 10 deep breaths. And then you relate. You connect to how you're feeling. When you connect to how you're feeling, you express to your child how you're feeling, and then you ask how they're feeling. And then you regulate automatically. So I said to mom, sit on the bed, take 3 to 10 deep breaths, get in touch with how you feel, and then call me back and let me know what happens. That's all I said. Mom said, "Well, that doesn't seem like very sound therapeutic advice." Mom was a retired marriage and a 65-year-old retired marriage and family therapist of a 9-year-old daughter. I said, "Well, give it a shot and let's see what happens." So 4 days later, she called me. I was getting out of my car. I was in California. I answered the phone. I said, "Hello." She said, "Hey, Bryan, it's Nancy." I said, "Hi, Nancy. What's going on?" She said, "You're never going to believe what happened." I said, "Well, give me a try. Try it on me." She said, "I went in my daughter's bedroom. It's time for her bath." I said, "Honey, it's time for your bath." She started flipping out on the ground, kicking and screaming like she always does. But this time I sat on the bed. She said, "I felt like an idiot sitting on the bed while my 9-year-old's throwing this big tantrum." She said, "But do you realize in less than 10 seconds, she completely stopped what she was doing, climbed up on my lap as if she needed a hug, realized that she didn't, and she went and got in the bath. That was too much for my old heart."
Wow.
When I went to work with that family 6 months later, I found out that when that child who was adopted at the age of 3, when she was adopted, she had lice so thick on her you could pick it off with your fingers. So taking a bath for her was like post-traumatic stress disorder. But no other therapist had really paid attention to that because therapists like to focus on behaviors. So they were only focused on the fact that she didn't want to take a bath. They weren't focused on the fact that she had trauma around baths. Now, what about mom? Well, when mom was a little girl, she had an older sister. And she said the older sister used to set her down and scream in her face for hours. And mom said it would just terrify me. So basically, what you had was a 9-year-old daughter and a 65-year-old retired marriage and family therapist, both getting stressed and freaked out around bath time and having post traumatic stress disorder. Now, I had a mom who heard me tell that same story in a lecture. I was in Dallas. And 2 weeks after I told that story, she sent me an email. She said, "Hey, I was in your Dallas lecture." She said, "I heard you tell the story about the little girl whose name was Christina and her mother who was 9." She said, "I've got a little girl who's adopted who's 9 years old, and her name is Christina also." She said, "I heard you tell the story about telling the mom to reflect and relate and regulate." She said, "My little girl has problems taking a shower, and this has been going on for 4 years." So she said, "I heard you tell that story, so I thought I'm going to breathe. I'm going to regulate myself. I'm going to calm myself down. And I'm going to go up and tell my daughter it's time to take a shower." So I went upstairs, told my daughter it's time to take a shower. Sure enough, she started rolling her eyes and talking back like she always does. But this time, instead of getting upset with her, I just said, "Honey, if you need anything, I'll be right there." She said, "I couldn't believe it. My daughter went and got in the shower." But sure enough, she calls me like she always does. "Mom, the water's too hot or it's too cold. I don't like this soap. I don't like this towel." Mom said usually bugs the heck out of me. But this time, I went in the bathroom, I got what she needed, and I said, "Honey, if you need anything else, I'll be right here." She said, "I just sat right there in the bathroom and just waited for her." She said that was the best shower we'd had in 4 years. So I thought I'd go for a home run. My little 9 year old had her towel wrapped around her. We went in her bedroom. We sat on the edge of her bed. I put my arm around her and I said, "Honey, that was the best shower we've had in 4 years. What scares you so much about taking a shower?" She said, my 9 year old little girl looked up at me and she said, "Mom, the guy who sexually molested me made me take a shower with him." You see, Mom knew about the sexual molestation, but she didn't know about the shower. Her daughter had been molested by a guy at a daycare. She didn't know about the shower. So when her daughter told her the guy who sexually molested her made her take a shower with him, Mom, without missing a beat, because she was breathing and she was regulated, she looked at her little girl and she said, "Honey, you don't have to take a shower. You can take a bath." 2 weeks later, after I heard you tell that story and I'm emailing you now, my daughter gets in the bathtub and out so fast now, I hardly even know she's in and out. So that's 5 minutes to overcome 4 years of pain and struggle and challenge. And that's how powerful the work I teach is.
Wow, that is incredibly powerful. Wow. Well, okay. So now that we've got a little bit of context set and the listeners have a little bit of idea around not only the work you do, but the power of the work that you do, I'm going to switch gears just a little bit here.
Sure.
And I'm going to reiterate the question around relationships for the benefit of our listeners. So, Bryan, have you ever been introduced to a person or persons who completely changed the course of your life or your business, so much so that much of what you have today would not be possible if not for this person or persons? And I'm just really excited to hear your story and your experience around this topic of relationships.
Sure. Well, I believe relationship is the most important thing, and I've been very fortunate. And I'll say, actually, I'm gonna tell you three people that have had amazing
Okay.
impact on my life. The first was one of my professors from undergraduate school. His name was Bill Zellner. He was an irreverent, crusty old atheist of a sociology teacher, but he was smart and he was wise and he was kind, and he saw something in me that no one else had ever seen. He saw that I was smart, and he told me that one day, and he really embraced me in a way that was just very relational. And so that had a big impact on my life. And then when I got to graduate school, that guy who said, "Hey, Bryan," from across the campus, "Where are you doing your community clinicals at?" I said, "I don't know." His name was Lawrence G. Anderson. We called him Big A. He became a wise mentor to me and a good friend. And we stayed in close relationship beyond graduate school. And he was actually the first person I was visiting him after I had been in a couple different jobs. I was visiting him. I had moved to Oklahoma. He was living in Dallas. I had driven down for the weekend, spent the weekend with him and his wife and his family. and I was telling him about what I was doing intensive in-home with an agency. And as I was telling him, he said, "You could do that." And I was like, "Oh yeah, I guess I could." But see, I was as a kid, I was an entrepreneur. So I was that's all I was wanted to do was own and run businesses. But when I went to college, I kind of forgot about it because of sports. But he planted that seed. You could do that. And I was 25 years old. I was driving home that weekend and I was thinking about what he said, and I realized that I could do that. And so I called him up and I said, "Yeah, I can do it." He said, "Well, I'll help you get started." And so at 25 years old, I spent the rest of that year doing all the policies and procedures, renting an office, and started before I turned 26, I started my first official business. It was an intensive in-home agency, and
Okay.
he helped me get started doing that. And now I realized later that neither he nor I knew anything about business, but he got me started and he got me hooked, because after that I never worked for another person.
Okay.
And
Okay.
a few years into business and becoming pretty famous in the adoption space, I was doing these parenting camps, and I had a guy came, him and his wife came to one of my parenting camps, and his name was Lee Nefsky. And he was an entrepreneur. Had retired. He was 48 years old. He had sold a company for 30-40 million dollars and had retired. He's a Canadian guy. And we really hit it off, and he became a business mentor to me, and he just guided me through some really tough times in my early entrepreneurial career, just giving me wisdom, just giving me friendship, and just giving me some of those business nuggets and reflections from his own process as a business owner that he had that really had an impact on my life. And that was 25 years ago. We're still good friends. I call him now and he'll just talk and talk and talk. And those three people have had an enormous impact on my life, and it's hard to know kind of where I would be
Yeah.
without the influence of those three specifically.
Yeah. So, what is an example of a situation where you personally made a really substantial impact, and maybe even in the moment, maybe it surprised you a little, and at the same time, that would have never been possible if not for your relationship with either one of these three gentlemen?
Okay, so I think you lost me. So what would tell me, say the first part
So,
again?
a
Well, what was the
situation.
contribution that led to those relationships,
Yes.
basically?
Yeah.
Okay, so the contribution with Bill Zellner is, I think I was just the student who I listened, and I was interested. I paid attention. I took good notes and I asked good questions.
Yeah.
And people have always said I ask good questions. And so I think he just saw in me, I was young, but he saw in me a student who was really interested in what he had to offer.
Yeah.
So I think that was important for him. And for Larry, I think it was probably the same. I was just, I was a hippie. I was a hippie. I've always been pretty much anti-authority. I just kind of walked to the beat of my own drummer, and I think he really appreciated that. I just wasn't caught up in a lot of the usual bullshit that students can get caught up in. And I was a good student, and I was relaxed and laid back, and I didn't take anything too serious, but I was also very inquisitive, and I think
Yeah.
he really appreciated that.
Yeah.
And for Lee Nevsky and his wife, they came to my parenting camp when they were at a real low point with their daughter, and they didn't know what else to do. And I think I really sowed into them some hope and some real strategies for how to parent and have a relationship with their daughter that they hadn't had before that. And I think that really lent some desire to really kind of embrace me and want to guide me through my own business ventures.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, for two of those relationships, it just your natural inquisitiveness. and
Yeah.
just genuine curiosity to know more, to learn more, you know. And I'm the same way. I mean, sometimes it bothers my wife because I ask so many questions all the time, and yet, people, I mean, when we ask questions of people and then we just be quiet and
Yeah.
listen to them, and I can't tell you how many times over the years I've had people tell me that, like, man, Kev, I just feel so seen and heard around you
Mhm.
because you're just genuinely curious. You just listen to me.
Yeah.
And man, that's we get to give people a real gift, this gift of feeling seen and heard and understood just by asking
100%.
questions and then genuinely listening because we want to hear the answers.
Yeah. The gift of presence is
Yeah.
a not very common gift.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Bryan, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation today and to share from your heart and share your experience. And for anybody that might be listening to this right now going, man, Kevin, I really like Bryan. I love Bryan. I love how he shows up. Maybe they're curious. Maybe they're thinking of some of the things you shared and they're like, man, maybe I could use his help, or I might know somebody who could use their help.
Sure.
Any websites, any resources we can share with
Yeah, they can
folks?
they can find you can Google me, Bryan. It's Bryan with a Y. BryanPost.com is my website. And feartolove.com is my training site, my education site for
Okay.
parents. You can download a free copy of my ebook. And I also just launched an AI driven parent support app based on my knowledge base. It's called Bondify, Bondify.ai. So Bondify.ai. And anyone interested can try it out free for 14 days. And after that, it's less than $20 a month. And I say that Bondify, I believe, is better than any therapy. And an annual subscription to Bondify, which is $160, is cheaper than one session of therapy. So you give it a shot and see what kind of impact it has in your life. So that's
Awesome.
Bondify.ai.
Awesome. Awesome. Bryan, any last thing you feel led to share before we call it a wrap?
Sure, I'd like to just really encourage people, Kevin, that there's a Harvard physiologist. His name was Herbert Benson. In the 1970s, he wrote a book called The Relaxation Response, and what he found is that there is one proven way to interrupt our stress, and that is through breathing. And we don't realize so many times that we're stressed and we're not breathing, we're holding our breath. And when that happens, you can't think clearly and you can't be present, and it puts you into survival. And so, any challenge that you have, the most powerful thing you can do is stop and slow down and breathe. And that breathing will unlock so many possibilities for you. And then I always like to close with, in any given situation, we always have two choices. Every single one of us, in any moment, we have two choices. We can continue to react from our same old blueprints of stress and fear and overwhelm, or we can stop, we can slow down, we can take 3 to 10 deep breaths, and we can choose love. And I hope you'll choose love, and God bless each and every one of you. And thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Absolutely. And Bryan, once again, thank you for taking the time to have this conversation today. Really appreciate it and really appreciate you.
My pleasure.